Adrian Tchaikovsky once said this in an interview.
Monsters that tell us about us are always going to be more interesting than just a monster.
This was in reference as to why dragons are so popular in writing and why they work so well. Adrian's opinion was that a dragon with an element of human emotion behind it is much more compelling as a thing than just a monster. If you take that premise and apply it loosely to manga, then you arrive at the inner demon trope. Inner demons within manga have been around for the longest time. They've become the dragons of the manga world in a weird, not-so-dragon way, if you like. Much like dragons in works of fiction, these come in many different shapes and sizes for the inner demons. Kurama, blue flames, hollows. Sometimes these demons are just simply the repressed emotions of the main character. And more often than not, these characters often find a way to coalesce, but sometimes they don't. Sukuna, Ryuman, and Itadori Yuji have one of the simplest relationships, but paradoxically the most complicated at the same time. They both want each other gone, but they share a body. Go figure. That paradoxical nature is what makes them so compelling. The push, pull, tug of war, and clash of ideals that ensues is one of twists, turns, ups and downs, the constant tension that something is going to go wrong to be set ablaze at any given moment from either character fills us, the reader and the audience around it, with an awareness of palpable tension. There's a constant tension in the air that Sukuna could take over Yuji should he lose control of his body at any given moment. So in this video, I want to explore their relationship, but not only to themselves, but to other characters around them, characters that they interact with. I want to explore why they stand out, explore why Gege Akutami crafted two characters, one representing apathy and the other empathy, and also how these characters tell us about us. Yuji throughout the series has multiple points wherein he shows borderline overwhelming empathy to those who have sought to hurt him and his friends. 4 points in the series can be highlighted as key moments in Yuji's development as an empathetic character. And that's not to say that these points are the only ones, but rather they're the most poignant to me. Iso, Mahito, Higuruma, Sukuna. Each one of these characters represents and highlights core moments in Yuji's arc, and each character all has one thing in common. Acceptance. Iso being one of Yuji's first opponents who forces his hand into doing something that he doesn't want to do. Yuji doesn't want to kill, for obvious reasons I need not say, but for the more subtle reason is that Yuji's grandpa left him with the following wish. You're a strong kid, so help people. It doesn't have to be all the time, just whenever you can. You may feel lost, don't expect gratitude, just help them. And when it's your time to go, make sure you're surrounded by others, don't end up like me. Yuji killing Iso is something that he's not comfortable with in the slightest. It goes against the wishes of his granddad, a wish that you could argue shapes Yuji's entire character arc and forms a solid base for Yuji's moral compass. Toward the end of Yuji and Nobara's fight with Iso, Yuji witnesses Iso crying for the loss of his brother Kechizu. Tears of affection because of this surprising display of emotion. Itadori didn't finish him off. Yuji at this point recognizes the severity of his actions alongside Nobara. They're not fighting curses, they're fighting flesh and blood. They're fighting something close to human. As close to human as these two could possibly get. And I suppose in this regard, Jogo had a point. Seeing the man he thought was a curse shed tears over his brother sat with Yuji. He felt the pain of Iso seeing his brother die, and in response to this, Yuji's final words to his opponents aren't those of hatred or malice or evil intent. They're not words of spite or bitterness, disgust or hate. Instead, Yuji simply apologizes to Iso. When the deed is done, Yuji remarks how that hurt. And it's pretty on the nose that Yuji is not only referring to the hate of punching through someone, but also the thought of ending someone's life. A life that only wanted to protect his brother in his final moments. And despite their physical differences and their life differences, they felt emotions all the same, just like Yuji did. Later on, Yuji expresses the sadness he felt at such an action, in stark contrast to Nobara, who looks at the situation through the lens of a Jujutsu sorcerer, stating how they can't save everyone, and as sorcerers, these things are going to happen, they're bound to happen. But Yuji's point of view focuses more on the human element and the emotion of what just happened. Quote, he was crying. for his brother who died in front of him. I'm happy that you and I survived. I'm relieved. But even so, because of the life I took, tears were shed. That's all. The more sickening part of Iso, and why I chose to case study Iso and Kechizo over Junpei, is simply due to the revelation that some 50 chapters down the line, we find out that Yuji and Choso are actually brother, therefore making the emotions that Yuji at this moment in time had hit even harder, because if Yuji and Choso are brothers, so too are Iso and Kechizo. And throughout the series, Yuji's family are a chaotic mixture of some of the worst and best people that we come across within the series. And despite the revelation of Yuji's family, he comes to accept his actions, and he comes to accept Choso as his brother, and he comes to accept the actions that caused the death of his other brothers. And he tries to atone for them. When I first mentioned the 4 characters I had in mind, you probably jumped up at the screen in awe and confusion as to why I didn't choose Junpei in that selection. That's because Junpei is key to Mahito's section of the story. Not to rob Junpei of his agency, but I view him as sort of symbiotic to Mahito's story, a counterpart, the other side to the coin if you like, a yin-yang if you will. Without one, the other ceases to function properly. From day one, the introduction of Mahito is extremely clear that we are dealing with something different. It's no coincidence that Mahito's appearance out of the 4 disaster cases is the only one that looks the most human. If Hanami represents the forest, while Jogo represents the fires, alongside Dagon representing the oceans, then Mahito represents death in its human form. He represents the worst of us. Each and every one of those specific subjects in some form is a horror unto itself. Being lost and swallowed by the forest, if the fire doesn't burn you alive, the smoke will smother you. If the oceans don't drown you, the life inside it will eat you without a second thought. All of these things are terrifying in their own right, and it's easier to push that fear aside when you realise that it's just part and parcel of nature. We, as humans, have evolved to be very weary and cautious of such things. It's allowed us to rise to the top of our food chains and stand outside it, if you will. However, Mahito represents an evil far beyond nature. He represents humans. Feel free to disagree with me here, but when it comes to horror, I've always maintained that the worst types of horror is not the stuff that comes from the skies, the oceans, or perhaps even the stars beyond. It's nothing cosmic or ethereal or eldritch. No. The worst type of horror is the person sat next to you. The person you thought you could trust, the person you never saw coming. The conscious effort of another human being to harm you, hurt you emotionally, rip you apart, metaphorically or maybe even physically. When a person makes a conscious effort to do these things, I think that is more terrifying than fire or the oceans or being lost in a forest in and of itself. Because on some level, humans are the most terrifying thing on this planet. We, as humans, conjure this kind of evil that can't fit into the food chain. It doesn't feel natural. It's this kind of evil that finds Junpei. It's this kind of evil and malice that tricks Junpei, plays with him, manipulates him, listens to his worries and his troubles, and it makes him feel as if he's heard and seen. And when all is said and done, Junpei is to Mahito a bait on the end of a fishing rod, trying to catch Yuji Itadori. And for these reasons and these reasons alone, I consider Junpei and Mahito symbiotic, as I mentioned earlier. Without Mahito, Junpei would have never have gained the powers to take revenge on those in school who'd made his life a living hell, who'd bullied him to no end, burned him with cigarettes. However, without Junpei, Mahito would not have found the bait to lure Yuji out into the school in order to kill him. Mahito is malicious down to his very, very core. It's a kind of evil that Mahito represents. If Yuji is, at this point in the story, representing empathy and acceptance, then Mahito represents apathy and rejection of everything that Yuji is. A direct rejection of Yuji and who he is. And throughout the story, Mahito isn't just happy with wanting Yuji dead and gone. He wants to see Yuji suffer. Now I want to walk you back in time to Shibuya. Shortly after Yuji was witness to thousands dying through the chaotic lens of Sukuna, being the passions of to chaos incarnate, right after the visual of Nobara fallen from what seemed like a deadly injury at the time, just moments shy of seeing Nanami being eviscerated into blood, meat and plasma. The following conversation between Mahito and Yuji is what I find the most interesting between their two characters. At the beginning of the video, I quoted Adrian Tchaikovsky, in which he told the interview, Monsters that tell us about us are always going to be more interesting than just a monster. Mahito is bar for bar the perfect representation of that quote. The monologue given from Mahito after physically beating Yuji down, after mentally torturing him, destroying his friends, annihilating his willpower and dominating his mental. Mahito explains to Yuji, "You are me, Yuji Itadori. I kill without a second thought, just like how you save people without a second thought. The instincts of a curse against the so-called dignity obtained by the human reason." Mahito is the monster who tells us about us. Despite how on the nose it is, Mahito perfectly puts on display how Yuji and him are two sides to the one coin. Because unlike the other disaster cases, Mahito is the one who represents us. He represents the absolute worst that humanity has on display. He represents everything you fear about the humans you hear about in the fear-mongering headlines in the papers. It is in those details that Mahito really comes to shine. Later down the line, Yuji realizes that Mahito cannot be reasoned with. He can't be talked down, he can't be forgiven. But despite all that, Yuji accepts Mahito. He accepts the damage Mahito has left on his soul, on his life, on his face. He accepts the scars Mahito will leave him with. But most importantly, Yuji accepts that he is Mahito. Just as Mahito is the monster in Yuji's story, so too is Yuji the monster in Mahito's story. It's this monster right here that tells Yuji about himself. Born from their deep, unwavering hatred for one another, Yuji is going to end Mahito right here and right now. And despite everything that Yuji has gone through up until this point, one thing is born from their time together. One thing that lingers on with Yuji long after Mahito was gone. The Koga mentality. Yuji's acceptance of his role in this world. Yuji's acceptance of his place in dispelling these curses and killing them off and seeing them away. And this seems to be, at the time, one of the only ways that Yuji can bring himself to cope and justify the actions that he is going to take going forward. But once again, acceptance finds its way into Yuji's mind.
Itadori, 自分の意思で人を殺めたことはあるか?
If Iso was the crime and Mahito was the very biased jury, then there must be a judge. The role of judge falls squarely on Higuruma's shoulders. Higuruma, for me, is one of two unique characters within this series, standing squarely shoulder to shoulder alongside Choso. Now, I'm aware Higuruma also doesn't fit the quote-unquote monster description traditionally. However, it's clear from Higuruma's actions that in this introduction of his story, Higuruma does not see himself in a way that he likes. In fact, it's implied that he heavily dislikes himself and he can't really bear to think about himself after witnessing Yuji as a person. So, while he's not a monster for this example, I'd like to treat him as such. Both Choso and Higuruma, in my opinion, perfectly encompass Gege's mythos and message behind the story and the series. Quote, "If there was one thing to mention, it was that no one holds the ultimate truth. The quote-unquote good guys as well as the quote-unquote bad guys seek to kill the hero out of pure selfishness. But others are led to this decision by logical reasoning. If no one is really right, then no one is wrong either. Each character is guided by their own ethics." And this was in response to what Gege thought the main takeaway, the main premise of Jujutsu Kaisen was. Meeting Higuruma, there is an air of professional chaos about him. He's a full-grown man in a suit, sitting in a bathtub in a theatre. It's certainly a spectacle for an introduction. Higuruma as a character is a criminal defense lawyer, which provides an interesting dynamic for his and Yuji's conversations, in which Yuji is the perfect fit for a criminal in the eyes of the law at this moment in time. Which brings me to the key moment between the two, the retrial.
ああ、俺が殺した。これは嘘でも否定でもない。Guilty! Confiscation! Death penalty!
After being accused of mass murder by Judge Man, Yuji wastes zero time in accepting the claims and the punishments that follows. Two things happen in this very moment. One, Yuji's declaration visibly startles Higuruma, and that in turn makes Higuruma question everything so far. Two, Yuji's eyes and face is notably one of complete remorse and peace, acceptance, if you will. In the chapters prior, Higuruma talks about the people he defends in his cases. He talks about a certain look that they always give him when the verdict is delivered. Furthermore, mentioning that he can't leave things alone, and because of that, he has to keep his eyes open. He wants to see what is going on. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but those points I've mentioned are key to Yuji's confession, because in the moment of Yuji's confession, Higuruma's eyes are wide open. He's not looking away from Yuji, and Yuji's face matches nothing like what Higuruma has seen before. Despite everything Higuruma believes and has seen many times before, Yuji now stands antithetical to it. He stands counter to it. Despite being innocent, Yuji accepts the punishment, and he harbors no resentment towards Higuruma for giving him that punishment. All people are weak and ugly, no matter how high-minded they aspire to be. This moment right here, I think, is Higuruma trying his best to sort of reaffirm his beliefs, in my opinion. I think he's trying to fall back on years of experience in how humans act and try to rationalize their actions in counter to what Yuji's doing right here and right now in this moment. But he simply can't. Because Yuji isn't like everyone else he's met. Yuji knows what he did wasn't truly his fault, but despite that, he wasn't strong enough to stop it. Because he couldn't stop Choso in that fateful bathroom brawl in Shibuya, because Choso knocked him unconscious, almost killing him, because of that, Jogo was able to force-feed him more fingers of Sukuna, and because of that, Sukuna was able to massacre a city. And because Yuji accepts that, he fits into Higuruma's description of all people are weak and ugly. At this point in time, Yuji probably thinks he's weak because he wasn't able to stop what happened in Shibuya, and he also probably thinks he's ugly because of how many people he ultimately killed while under the possession and control of Sukuna. Yuji's weakness in one moment led to the butterfly effect of Sukuna's rampant destruction. That in and of itself is the ugly weakness Higuruma talks about, and it's the same one that Yuji is accepting right now. I think it's here that Higuruma sees himself in Yuji, to some degree, in my personal opinion. But he also sees that same ugly weakness in himself, hence why staying with Yuji would only make him hate himself more. Later on in the series, Higuruma can barely look at Yuji, and Yuji and Higuruma's interaction with each other once more ends with the acceptance. Despite it being reluctant from Higuruma, it's acceptance nonetheless. Yuji accepting his role in Sukuna's massacre at Shibuya, Higuruma accepting that he too is just as ugly and just as weak as he is seeing others. And in that regard, does he truly have the right to judge people?
Kozo, せいぜい噛みしめろ.
If Yuji were to represent empathy, Sukuna would represent the direct opposite, apathy. Complete and utter disregard for others' feelings, emotions, and well-being, unless of course it benefits him a little bit later down the line, but that's not relevant right now. Sukuna in and of himself is one of the more interesting characters within the series. Despite not having many instances of what most would consider deep conversations, there are three key moments throughout the series that put on display Sukuna's personality, who he is and what he is about. Sukuna's first appearance demonstrates clear inconsideration for those around him, women, children. He does not care, really, until Yuji stops to ask him what the hell he's doing in his body. Sukuna doesn't even question whose body he's in. As far as he's concerned, this dude just woke up from 1,000 years of slumber and woke up ready to instantly throw hands and kill whoever was close to him. Some time passes and we arrive at Shibuya. And by this point in the series, we've seen Sukuna's complete disregard for Yuji's safety and anyone else's for that fact multiple times. A complete and utter lack of empathy for Yuji and anyone else's multiple times now. However, Shibuya calls all of that into question. In the finale of his fight with Jogo, Sukuna, for the first time in the series, displays emotions that can't be described as apathy. It's not malice or violence, it's actual emotion. It's a sequence that makes you sit upright and say, hang on, this fucking guy does care. If only a little bit, there's something there. Sukuna's conversation with Jogo isn't just the tip of the iceberg, I think, but rather a doorway into something deeper for Sukuna. I think it's a real moment in time where Sukuna shows even just a modicum of empathy for Jogo, his goals and his strength. However, this wasn't earned easily. Jogo literally had to fight for his life in order to earn this respect. He took a beating from Sukuna. And the same thing happens a few more times within the series. Jogo, Gojo, Kashimo, Yuji, all of these characters that Sukuna fights with, in the end, he comes to respect them and their strength, desires, determination, and willpower, whatever it is that they are standing for. With each of those characters that Sukuna comes across, a conversation is had. Whether that conversation is had directly, or through the subtext in the pages, or even through the character's interpretation of Sukuna. Each one of those conversations brings us closer to somewhat understanding the mystery that is Sukuna. Instead of being an absolute monster, he starts to become a character that has lived for a long time, and during that time, he's lived to see many opponents, varying from weak to strong. And it's made abundantly clear to us, the audience, that Sukuna respects one thing and one thing only: strength. The type of strength that he respects can, I think, vary from strength of character, growth, body, or willpower. But as an individual, Sukuna looks for strength above all else, and it's in this search for strength that Sukuna displays emotional intelligence that goes beyond what we've been led to believe about his character for the first time within this series. Now, apathy is a word that I've used to describe Sukuna many times through this video, and throughout the course of my time reading the series of Jujutsu Kaisen. While it might not be the most accurate word to describe Sukuna, I think it's the one that I find the most fitting. To get a little bit meta here and lean into Gege's philosophy on the series, the word I chose to describe Sukuna might not be the one that you choose to describe him with. And that's okay. We don't all hold the ultimate truth. What I think is the truth might not be your truth. Because when all is said and done in life, none of us have the ultimate truth. We're all just living by our own ethics here. Apathy at its core is a feeling of indifference, a lack of emotion or interest for situations or people. Empathy at its core is a feeling of ableness to perceive the emotions of others, to see the perspective of others. And a final conversation within the series really puts that on display for Yuji and Sukuna, where Yuji walks Sukuna through his hometown. He tells him about random stories of time passing and explaining to Sukuna that he's a person, he's one who has lived, he's loved, and he's grown. And at the end of that conversation, Sukuna, he understands what Yuji is saying. It's not that he's incapable of understanding it, he just simply doesn't care. He feels nothing for Yuji specifically. Both of these emotions that Sukuna and Yuji display, they have nuance and a broader varied meaning depending on the person it refers to and how they're wired, I guess. So what does this mean for us, the reader? How do the monsters in the story teach us about us? To explore Jujutsu Kaisen as a story, or any story for that fact, is to explore yourself as a human, I think. Upon reading the story many times, I think the ultimate truth that I've come to hold on to in my heart is that the meaning of this story is that your truth is the right truth. I guess that leans into Gege's mythos, so I guess he's right. So I guess in that point, maybe he holds the ultimate truth. But again, what I'm saying could be totally different from what you're saying. And just as Mahito's truth is the right truth for him, or Yuji's truth is the right truth for him, when you read Jujutsu Kaisen, there's often moments where you're not really just rooting for the quote-unquote good guys or the bad guys, because there's some moments that you find yourself placing yourself into the shoes of both sides, or realizing that both sides sometimes have a point. Yuji is a character who has been raised and instilled with values that he should use his strength to help people. Sukuna is a character who values strength, but their views are what shape them into completely different people and characters. Even Mahito is a character that is absolutely deplorable. However, on some level, there's a truth to what he says. He's been born into a world wherein his kind are being killed without second thought because they're evil. And if you take into account the events in Modulo's story, these cases could have a home where they're loved rather than hunted on Samuria. From Mahito's perspective, he's just as right as Yuji is to us and our perspective. The characters in this world can be shaped by society and their birthrights to the point of being willing to kill and execute children in order to maintain the peace of the world, rather than teach these kids to deal with a power that they weren't really prepared to deal with or carry in the first place. Sukuna as a character is one who has been around for so long that he's grown so strong it's almost like he struggles to connect with anyone unless they challenge him in some way or another. After all, you can ask a flower to bloom, but you can never truly ask it to understand you. In the final chapters of the series, it's implied that Sukuna wasn't always like this, that there could have been another way of living for him, and in the next go around, maybe he might travel that path, and that's a decision that is influenced by over 1,000 years of solitude, but it's also due to the overwhelming strength of will, indomitable spirit that Yuji showed him. It's not something that I see touched upon much in this story and those that read it, but the fact that Sukuna took in a small child and protected them in the past shows that Sukuna wasn't always this way. He wasn't always this violence-driven absolute fiend. He's just lived a long life. And when you've lived a long life like Sukuna has, it's hard to care about others when you know that they're only going to be present for what feels like a small moment in time. Again, taking into account the story of Modulo, Yuji also embodies this exact same thing. Over the course of 60 plus years, Yuji has been unaging whilst watching his friends age and wither away, attending funeral after funeral, and it's easy to see how that has changed Yuji. The one that we are seeing in Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo right now is not the same Yuji that we met at the beginning of the story. Time and death and grief have suffocated him. And these monsters in the series, they teach us about us. They teach us about family. They teach us about grief, about living, loving, loss, longevity. These monsters in the series teach us about life in their own unique and twisted ways, in a way that makes you sit back and really take in the message that Gege is saying, that no one in this series is really right or wrong. They're all just fighting with their own beliefs. And I think that's what makes these monsters, these villains, these characters and heroes all so compelling, because they represent this small grey area in life that many of us live on a day-to-day basis. And I find that beautiful. Adrian Tchaikovsky once said this in an interview.
Monsters that tell us about us are always going to be more interesting than just a monster.
Jujutsu Kaisen is one of hundreds of brilliant examples of books, films, literature, manga, anime, you name it, but it's a brilliant example of something that fulfills that statement. But it's just got a little bit of extra added spice and aura that just makes it stick out to me just that little bit more. Anyways, if you made it this far into the video, I really hope you enjoyed it. This one is the result of a passion project, and it's took me a couple of weeks to put together. So please consider liking and subscribing, and as always, I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Much fucking love, big fucking kisses, peace.